Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for staying for the final presentation. Today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about nonprofits and how they should start to think about their digital roadmaps if they haven't already. So it's 2018. The case for digital has been made. For-profit firms that have embraced digital have superior outcomes. This is known. Outcomes that are related to market valuation. A recent McKinsey study found that business-to-business companies that are digital leaders generate 2x more return to shareholder growth than their peers. It relates to financial performance. The same study found that these companies that were digital leaders generated 5x more revenue growth and 8x more EBIT growth. And it's not just these financial indicators that are benefited from digital, it's also from the customer standpoint. So another McKinsey study found that digital-first customer journeys generate 10 to 20 percentage points more satisfaction than traditional journeys. So next, I'm going to kind of break down why this is happening and then relate it back to nonprofits and think about what they can do to drive this growth. So when you think about productivity and the productivity equation, all business school students know, productivity is the function of resources, labor, and capital. And digital can really impact all three of these areas. So for example, cloud computing can lower the amount of capital that you need. Automation can increase the amount of resources that a firm has available. And analytics can increase the quality of that labor's work product. So it's clear that this is all well and good, that digital is the future, and it has been for a long time. And yet, 50% of nonprofits do not have a digital strategy. And less than 10% of nonprofits have had successful digital transformations. Now I'm going to go into next why this is the case. And conventional wisdom would suggest that it's due to three things. It's due to funding, it's due to, they don't have enough money to invest in these digital initiatives. It's due to talent, they don't have the right digital talent. Or it's due to executive support. They don't really have the people who are driving this with the veracity that they need to. But is this necessarily true? Well, when you look at funding, digital transformations and digital strategies have both near-term and long-term financial benefits. So to say that a company can't do this because funding is an issue, I don't think that's true. In terms of talent, now I'm not saying that digital talent isn't important. I do think it's very important for any firm, for-profit or nonprofit, but I also think a number of digital strategies can be implemented with a company's current resources, its current talent base. And when it comes to executive support, well, 72% of nonprofits do not view lack of leadership as the problem. So if those three issues aren't the cause, then what is it? I would argue that it's time. Nonprofits are run so lean that for many of their employees, the majority of their time is spent on the most essential tasks. The first is from a capacity standpoint. Obviously, if you're spending all of your time on these essential tasks that are not necessarily geared towards any mission, if you're spending all of your time on these tasks, then you don't have time to really focus on the more strategic initiatives like implementing new digital strategies. But I think even more important than that one is that the lack of time means that these essential tasks aren't necessarily tied directly to the mission of the nonprofit. And let's take a step back. If you think about who are the type of people that work at a nonprofit, it's an incredible person who's very passionate about a particular cause. So if you think about this, and they're responsible for a particular task that isn't necessarily tied to that mission, then what does that result in? It oftentimes will result in an unmotivated employee who's not living up to their full potential. So time is as much of a cultural issue as it is a structural one. Now, digital strategies can change this. They can give time back to the employee to allow them to focus on more strategic initiatives that are directly tied to the mission. And digital transformations should look at employees and specifically employee personas when they're thinking about creating their digital strategies so that there's more of a focus on increasing the capacity with which an employee can create impact and accelerate the nonprofit's mission. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to go through some of these employee personas and think about how a nonprofit can go through an exercise like this to identify particular actionable and tactical strategies that will ultimately inform a broader digital transformation strategy. So just a little bit of background on employee personas. So personas in general are fictional representations of a particular group. In this case, we'll be looking at employees by a particular segment. In this case, we'll be looking at employees by business function. The purpose of this is, it's just a thought exercise to internalize employees' needs and pain points, and then use this to identify the key digital opportunities and ultimately inform their roadmap. Now, I do want to add another point on how most of you have probably heard about personas. Typically, they're spoken about in terms of customers. And I do think that this is definitely another thing that nonprofits should look at when they're thinking about their digital transformation strategy. But for the purposes of this discussion, we'll just be focusing on the employee personas. And we'll be looking at 4 employees. So we have IT Ingrid, who is the head of the IT department at her nonprofit. We have Development Doug, who's responsible for all of the fundraising efforts for the nonprofit. Program Pete is actually responsible for interacting with the clients and delivering services directly. And then we have CEO Cindy, who's responsible for the whole ship. So I'm going to walk through a little scorecard that I put together for each of these employees. And the idea is that I want to show a nonprofit how they can use this type of an exercise to craft their digital strategy. So let's look at IT Ingrid. So there's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but this is what a potential scorecard would look like when you're going through this type of an exercise. It has some profile information on the top left. It has IT Ingrid's motivations, frustrations, and then from that, it has the digital strategies that can solve her problems. So I'm just going to focus on her frustrations and how those can be solved with digital strategies. So in terms of her frustrations, IT Ingrid spends the majority of her time, over 50% of her time, on non-value add activities like server maintenance, as well as server management. And this is true for many IT people in the industry and for-profits and nonprofits. A lot of their time is just managing that uptime because they haven't adopted cloud yet. She doesn't like to do these activities, but knows that if she doesn't and the servers fail, then the nonprofit could be severely impacted, whether that's ceasing operations or whether that's missing out on significant fundraising that could be going through. So what digital strategies would solve this? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a public cloud migration. And this benefits IT Ingrid and the organization as a whole in 2 areas. First, it decreases her server costs. And second, and most importantly, it frees Ingrid's time and allows her to have the opportunity to be reconnected with the mission and the reason for her going to the nonprofit in the first place. So I have some information there in terms of the financial benefits that this would have. I'm not going to go through all of it, but numerous studies have found that shifting workloads to the cloud can have significant financial benefits in terms of reducing the IT budget by 20 to 30%. But the more interesting point is the fact that this would free up her time. She's not going to be spending that 50% managing the uptime. Uptime is going to be guaranteed. The organization is going to be safe. And now she can focus on developing these applications for Program Pete, or developing or looking into analytics that would ultimately help the nonprofit in the long run. So for Development Doug, just go again through Doug's frustrations and potential strategies. So frustrations, Doug's frustrated that he has to spend a large portion of his time managing a clunky and insecure donor database. No one likes to do that. Doug is also frustrated when, like any typical salesperson or donation solicitor, he's frustrated when he spends large periods of time with potential donors that are ultimately not interested in the nonprofit's mission and do not donate. So how can we solve this for Doug? Well, I see three areas that this could be solved. First is related to automation. So, migrating that donor database to the cloud would free up Doug's time to really focus on the second two options, but it would also improve the accessibility of the data, the speed at which the data is procured, the security of the data. So there's many, many benefits outside of just freeing up Doug's time that moving this workload, moving this data storage to the cloud would provide. Now, what does he do with all of his time? Well, he can actually look into the analytics. So two things that we learned in database marketing were customer lifetime value and predictive targeting. So that plays directly into nonprofits in the area of donors. So you could do a donor lifetime analysis to identify which donor segments are the most profitable and which ones Doug should prioritize. It's a very simple exercise that can be done in Excel or any open source software that doesn't require additional investment and can be put together by pretty much anyone. Predictive donor targeting. This is creating a donor propensity model to evaluate a list of donors and say, okay, well, which donor has the highest propensity to donate and which one should I thus spend most of my time with? So again, both of these activities are extremely value add to a nonprofit, and yet they don't really require too much additional resources or expertise. So I won't go through Program Pete in the spirit of time, but I'll just wrap up with CEO Cindy. So what Cindy is frustrated with is when her team lacks passion. She doesn't like it when her employees view their job as merely a job rather than something that has a higher purpose. Well, if they have more time back to focus on these mission-related tasks, maybe that could be solved. She's also frustrated when the board of directors tells her to be more digital without offering any advice on how to get started. So two recommendations for CEO Cindy are for her to really evaluate the organization's health, to understand if the organization itself is ready for these digital technologies, these digital strategies, which ones will they need to wait until? And if they do need to wait on certain digital strategies and there are some barriers, how can she work to overcome those? Now, when they are ready for their digital transformation strategy, I encourage CEO Cindy to use this persona exercise along with the customer persona exercise to create a transformation strategy that's ultimately greater than the sum of the parts. Ultimately, this digital transformation needs to be not just a collection of digital strategies, but something that relates back to the broader themes of operations, of productivity, and of client engagement. So this is my approach to nonprofits and how they could start to think about digital transformations. Thanks for your time. Open it up for questions. Robin.
Sorry, just one thing. So it's great, framework, and I love all the ideas. But as a non-for-profit, some of them may not have expertise what they want to pay for or what they want to implement. What would be your suggestion? Because they may not be able to hire expensive consultant to identify.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
How do we do their best chance to understand those specific area to tackle?
That's a great question. So in case anyone didn't hear, the question is, where are they going to get this expertise from? Who's going to be the one telling them that, hey, here are some potential digital strategies after doing an exercise like this? Well, I think going through an exercise like this, you'd identify the pain points, and from that, you could start to think about, okay, well, how do we solve this with digital? But I also think the other piece that's critical here for every nonprofit is board engagement. 3% of respondents from one of the surveys that I mentioned before mentioned that they view, so only 3% of respondents saw their board as digitally savvy. That needs to completely change. Too many nonprofit boards do not have technology committees or digital committees or digital embedded into the committees that already exist. So I think that digital and technology need to be a priority from the board level because that's where you get these shared ideas in terms of what are the possibilities.
Love that. Having served on a nonprofit board,
Yeah,
you
and
get brought
that's
in to help with technology. One person is not enough.
exactly.
How has this worked with the nonprofit that you advise?
Yeah, absolutely. So in case anyone wasn't at the presentation last time, I've spent a lot of time, many years, with the nonprofit Easter Seals, Massachusetts. It's a disability nonprofit based in Boston. And this is something new for them. They have been taking steps in terms of migrating some workloads to the cloud, which is very promising. But in terms of having that comprehensive digital strategy, there really hasn't been enough time for them to think through all of the different things that they would need to think through to set that 3 to 5 year roadmap. I'll be working with them over the summer to help them create that roadmap. But yeah, I think it's, and I don't think that they're alone in that, I'm sure that statistic, 50% of nonprofits don't have digital strategies. It needs to be a priority because just like for-profit companies, nonprofit companies could be targets for disruption. So they need to protect themselves right now.
I mean, it's interesting you were saying that these things aren't the obstacles, and I think one of them was leadership, or it was on the right side, people, executive leadership, but the people who you asked were themselves, right? And I assume that's the leadership saying that leadership isn't the issue.
So the statistic there actually comes from a study that was done by the Charity Digital Skills Report, or it's the Skills Platform, sorry, and it surveyed over 496, so just about 500 people at all ranges of nonprofits. So it was many different, it wasn't just the management who was saying this, but yeah.
Yeah, one other, related issue to that is that often nonprofits are judged on things like keeping overhead down low and how much of the funding goes right to programming. And so it often puts a hurdle to doing any capital intensive effort or spending any money away from things that can't be directly attributed to a program. So while it's not a substantial hurdle and the long-term benefits are there, but short-term, it's often hard for them to make that trade-off because they'll get hit negatively in being evaluated because they're using, so if I'm supposed to solve a disease or whatever, this year I'm using 3% of that to build my digital profile, and I get criticized for using that as well. And so there are some even if the funding requirements aren't huge, there are hurdles. I've seen hurdles with companies, with people trying to use funding for that.
That is absolutely an issue. I would say a way to solve that would be make sure that you have the right timing with your digital transformation. So if one thing that you're going to be investing in is a cloud migration, wait until you really need to invest in that new infrastructure, the private infrastructure, and at that point you could really switch it over to the public cloud for the same cost.
Right.
But I think a lot of the other recommendations that I'm mentioning are, really impactful and really tactical things that can be done with the resources that they have now. So it wouldn't necessarily impact their bottom line or their cost, but it would potentially increase the impact that each employee is driving within the nonprofit. And I pull up this program Pete here because, and I want to call out this one thing, the client impact assessment. To your point of, a lot of people today, whether it's government organizations or whether it's individual donors, when they donate to a nonprofit or when they fund a nonprofit, they do want metrics. They absolutely do. And that's a big push for a lot of nonprofits to make sure that they can provide those metrics to their funders. And I think with these types of digital strategies, you would very much be able to provide, not only the metrics that you currently have in terms of client impact, but you'd potentially be able to provide all sorts of new client impact measures as a result.